Welcome, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. You are here for Designing a System of Navigators to Support Every Child, which is session 2 in the Success Planning webinar series that we've been putting on. It's wonderful to see people joining from such different places across the country. Thanks to those of you who have put where you're coming from in the chat. And we'd love to hear from others so that we can get a sense of the breadth geographically and the different roles people are in. So I am Lynn Sachs, and I am the research director at the Education Redesign Lab, and I will be your MC for the day. Before we get started, I just want to point out a couple of quick tech tips. If anybody needs tech support, please send a chat message to Jaspel. You can find him in the chat box. Please share any comments in the chat box, so feel free to talk with each other. But we will be doing questions through the Q&A function, and we'll have time for questions at the end. We are recording the session today, and live captioning is available by using the CC button on the screen. Again, if you need that and you're having any difficulty, please message Jaspel about that. The learning objective for today, which is the second webinar, is to understand some of the key design elements for creating a system of navigators to support every child. And hopefully by the end of the webinar, you'll have a much clearer understanding what we mean by that. And this is the navigator role in what we call success planning, which is an effort to ensure that every child has a personal navigator who can understand their needs and who can connect them to a set of resources and supports. And so we're going to start the session by giving a little bit of an overview just of the Education Redesign Lab and of success planning generally. And then we have a wonderful opportunity to hear from 2 school leaders, Dr. Keri Randolph, who is the Executive Officer for Strategic State and Federal Philanthropic Investments of the Metro Nashville Public Schools, and also Dr. Lori James Gross, the Superintendent of Unity Point School District in Carbondale, Illinois. And we'll hear how each of them has designed a system of navigators to support kids in their districts, and then to really think about the specific design elements and the choices that they made as they decided what made sense for their own school districts in order to put this in place. And at the end, as I mentioned before, we'll have time for some Q&A. So just as a little bit of foundation, for those of you who are new to the Education Redesign Lab, we call ourselves often Ed Redesign. We have a dual theory of action. First, that in order to support all kids, especially those who are living in poverty, what we need is a comprehensive coordinated system of supports through cross-sector collaboration. So you need to work across the entire community to make sure that all of the different pieces are working together to support kids instead of in separate silos. And then the second piece is that we need to personalize supports and services at the level of the individual child. And so we need to design what we call success planning that can look different in different communities. It's often, but not necessarily, based in school systems. It can be through an out-of-school program. It could be through a community-based organization. There are lots of different options, but at its core, it is a way to make sure that we know every child individually, that we understand their needs, and that we have a system to support the needs in place. We designed this based on two key research concepts. First, that trusting relationships between adults and children are essential to their development and their learning and their well-being. And second, that we know that providing increased supports to children is linked with better outcomes on a whole range of measures. So those are the 2 different components that we're trying to bring together in success planning. And I'm happy to announce that we are going to be premiering a short video that we have put together that we've been working on for a little while, that's designed to really capture the core concept of success planning in just a couple of minutes. And hopefully we'll provide an overview and a little bit more of a foundation for understanding the bigger picture before we dive into the specific element of the navigators. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And you will be among the first to get to see this new video.
If we want our children to be prepared and resilient, no matter what the future holds, then we have to make sure pathways to opportunity are open for all children. The problem is that many children are cut off from the resources needed to thrive. Healthcare, affordable housing, after-school and summer enrichment, academic support. Every child has unique needs and abilities, but too many face obstacles to get the support and opportunities they need. What if every child had a relationship with a navigator who could help connect them with these resources? At the Education Redesign Lab, we believe opportunity shouldn't depend on where you live or how much money your family has. Success planning is a strategy for removing obstacles and clearing pathways for children to reach their fullest potential. James is in 4th grade and loves to paint. He has missed a lot of school because of chronic asthma. Anna is in 10th grade and loves astronomy. She lives in a rural area without reliable broadband, so she often can't engage with her teacher and classmates online. Success planning pairs children like James and Anna with adult navigators who they can develop a relationship with. Navigators are uniquely trained and educated about the local health, social services, and educational programs and services that could remove obstacles for children. They are supported by an organized network of multi-sector community partners and government agencies equipped with programs, skills, and resources to holistically support students and families. For Anna, this means securing affordable, reliable broadband and signing her up for a science program after school. For James, the navigator connects him with a medical specialist, gets him a reading tutor, and enrolls him in a summer arts camp. Together, we can work to clear the pathways and provide real opportunity for our children and young people. Want to learn more about future opportunities and partnerships? Contact us to learn more. edredesign.org.
Great. I have to say it's exciting to see that, having moved from the initial drafting to its conclusion. So I'm happy to be able to share that with you. And so hopefully that gave you a better idea overall of what we mean by success planning. We don't have one specific approach to how you enact this, how you operationalize it. Instead, what we have is a set of 10 guiding principles on which we build and which we hope communities will build on. But what we want to really focus on today is specifically the navigator role in success planning. So you saw in the video that person who connects directly with kids, who forms a relationship, who gets to know each child well, and then has some way of connecting them with a system of comprehensive supports. So what we're going to spend time with now is understanding what that can look like in these two communities that I mentioned earlier. And then we'll dive into 3 different design elements to think about what kinds of options there are and how you within your own school districts or communities might think about a point of entry for starting the work and building on what you already have, thinking about maybe, a short-term solution and then a longer-term one, or being able to jump in with what you ultimately would want to see for certain elements and then building out from there. And so without further ado, I would like to turn it over to first Keri Randolph and then to Lori James Gross, who will each give you a short overview of how they have designed the system within their own districts. And then we'll go back and forth and have a chance to talk about the specific design choices that they made.
Thanks, Lynn. It's great to be with you all this afternoon. I'm going to do a brief overview and then look forward to your questions because there's a lot here. So I'm going to do a quick and dirty look at what we've done this past year. I will say that the Navigator role is new to Metro Nashville Public Schools. We just didn't, to be frank, leverage the challenges of the pandemic to launch this district-wide for 80,000 kids in August. So we are still certainly learning, but that's kind of the frame of under which I'm coming to you. So we can go to the next slide, Lynn. Thanks. So if we think about how the role is conceived for us currently, the Navigator is typically, we'll talk more about who they are, but it's someone based in the school where the student is enrolled. And they really are tasked with being an advocate, mentor, and a connector for that student. So we wrote scripts for them. They were doing check-ins on very specific things, especially in the early days of launching this role, in the early days of what is the crazy 2021 school year. And we tried to wrap support around them, and I'll show you a picture of that. So the way it worked is within that school, students were cohorted to a Navigator. We pushed for cohorts of no more than 12, so 12 students per Navigator. And then there was a support system around that Navigator. There was a school level team that would support them in needs that were identified and things as they did weekly check-ins with students and families, how they were connecting students to what they needed to be successful. Certainly social workers and counselors were involved in that. And we created a dashboard. So we can go to the next slide and I'll show you that, because if you think about how this was operationalized in the district, this was a key aspect of that. We started with very low-tech solution. We're a Microsoft district, and so we launched a Microsoft form that every time a Navigator checked in with the student, they completed the form, and they had a script that went along with that check-in, especially during the first 10 weeks of the program. And they were checking in on very specific areas, particularly in the beginning. So we can go to the next. So that form fed a Power BI dashboard for us. And then here you can see the areas that we were checking in. So consistent computer access, reliable internet, their virtual learning conditions. We had a lot of concern with, especially because we started our school year remotely, around the learning environment for a student wherever they were learning from, academic engagement, food insecurity, housing stability, mental, social, emotional well-being, and then enrichment and things like that. Early on, you can imagine that the four circles on the left-hand side, the four pie charts on the left-hand side of your screen were super significant. We were really pushing in even from the district level by monitoring this dashboard. Schools had access to their dashboards. They could monitor this on a daily basis. Over the period of the school year, we saw concerns shift to the right-hand side of your screen even more, specifically academics and enrichment. So we saw those concerns shift over time, but we were consistently checking in on these areas because we couldn't assume that what we heard from a student and family 2 weeks ago was still the same. We saw that our students and families were in just situations that were fluctuating. Okay, next slide. So since August, just to kind of jump to the end of this story or where we are now, we had over 360,000 check-ins with 60,000 students with about 5,700. I think we were almost up to 5,900 recently. And those check-ins generated 2,800 collaborative referrals. Collaborative referrals for us are when something triggers that outside support or an additional layer of support is needed for a student. It's that next level, sometime with an external provider like mental health support, or sometimes those are internal. But that is really when there's a significant challenge for a student. The thing I'll say about that number is it remained constant. In other words, the rate of collaborative referral generation from check-ins, and I don't know that I would have predicted this, was consistent over the last year. I think we all thought that they would be higher in the beginning and go down over time. There's two takeaways from that for me. One is I think as relationships were built with families and students, they were more willing to share some of the challenges they were facing. We were better able to identify those. So it was about relationship building. And the second was something I've already mentioned, that we had families and have families who are in fluctuating circumstances, and we can't make assumptions about their needs over time. Those are changing. Okay, next slide. This is just a quick graphic that we put together when we launched Navigator, and we're providing resources and supports for the schools. We have a handbook that this comes from, but you can see that the district support was around training, scripts, resource lists. We were also pushing in. I oversee our HERO programs, our students experiencing homelessness. We pushed in directly when a navigator tagged that a student might have a housing instability challenge. So we were able from the district level to support. But you can see that there was a navigator lead at each school, was providing support to all the navigators in those schools. And they were working on data through the dashboard. Principals were involved in those conversations. And we had support and coaching available. And we fit this into our existing structure. So for example, our MTSS, our multi-tiered systems of support. So this, we wanted to integrate this into the support systems already present in the district and school to supercharge it, is the way I thought about it, and take it to the next level and make sure that there were intentional check-ins with students. We couldn't leave anything to chance, right? Can't make assumptions, especially in the world that was last school year. And so this was about intention. What we learned over the last year is this is so important, had nothing to do with the pandemic in the level of importance. And we are committed to continuing this work. And it is a non-negotiable in the district now. Every student will have a navigator. So next slide. This is a slide I stole from ERS, who did a quick little profile on our work. So, but I'd like to talk about who the navigators are. So from the early stages, we knew that the teachers could not be the only group of people at a school serving in this role, that to get those small cohort rates, to build cohort sizes, to build strong relationships, we needed everybody who could build a strong relationship with this in a school to be engaged. And so we have teachers, absolutely. We have cafeteria staff, front office workers. We really encourage schools to think broadly about who could serve in that role. We did have some central office people, including myself, serving as navigators. Just as an aside, we're moving away from that model because we really think it's important that that person be at the school where a student attends. But we really are continuing to think really broadly about who can serve in that role. Mm-hmm. Next slide. And that's it for me, a very quick overview.
Thank you so much for that. There's a lot to unpack, but one thing I wanted to call out specifically is how you built on the multi-tiered system of support and found a point of entry, that could build from what you already have, that it doesn't require starting from absolute zero. I also just wanted to note, there was a question already about why families aren't more included. And I think in the framing that we've been using, we do tend to talk about children, but it's often children and families, the supports, obviously housing, food supports, those are family focused supports. So it generally is the case that families are involved. And I think as we turn from a large urban district to a smaller, more rural district, to hear how this operates in two really different contexts, we'll also be hearing about an approach that does involve families very centrally. So thank you. And now I will turn it over to Lori.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm excited to be here today to share our story. And as Lynn indicated, we are a small rural district in Southern Illinois. And pre-COVID, we were serving a little over 700 students. And in the year of COVID, we actually dropped to about 560 students. So what I want to do is give you just a little bit of history with regard to how we arrived at the ISSP process and how it looks just a little bit different than what you just heard recently from Keri. So actually, our journey with regard to establishing a whole child environment actually began back in the 2007-2008 school year. At that point in time, the demographics at Unity Point were changing significantly. We saw our low-income population increasing, our special education population increasing, and our EL population increasing. And so it became very clear that we were going to need to make some adaptations to what we were doing in assisting our students and looking at all students' strengths and weaknesses. So during that school year, we began conducting, and you can go ahead and move to the next slide, Lynn, I'm sorry. We began conducting ABC meetings at the grade level, and they were weekly meetings in which grade level teams would come together and they would discuss every student at that grade level regarding their academic issues, any behavior concerns, and then potential conclusions. And that information was then shared with the administration and essentially anyone that needed that information regarding each student. Out of that process came what we called child study team meetings. So out of the ABC meetings, we began looking at our most at-risk students and those students who needed, and we were calling them success plans at that time, where we would come together, all teachers who were involved with that student, as well as the parents, to create a success plan, or essentially a contract, because what it meant was that every person that was in attendance would have some role, and they had to agree to take on that role to assist that student, including the parents. So everybody was given an assignment to assist in the success of that student. And that's kind of where we began creating a academic behavioral type portfolio for all of our CST students. Also at that time, we had not really had a foundational system in place for all of our students regarding systems of support. So that's when we really started building our MTSS approach, looking at our academic and behavioral interventions, and really trying to create a system that would address, especially, again, first and foremost, our most at-risk students and families, and then also understanding and creating the definition that any student could be at risk at any moment in time, and so that that could expand out to all of our students. Probably the most significant thing that happened at that point was understanding that time was going to be needed to be able to conduct this level of work. So we presented what we were doing and had conversations with our school board, and they essentially assisted us by approving 9 hours of weekly plan time for our K-4 teachers and 6 hours of weekly plan time for our 5th through 8th grade teachers, with the understanding that there would both be individual and common plan times, so that things like ABC meetings, child study team referrals, etc., could be conducted during the school day to assist with the greatest amount of participation possible for that student. And we have continued that process into this current school year. And so in doing so, obviously we had to make sure that we had a variety of specials teachers, PE, art, music, media specialists, computer teachers, exploratory classes, etc., to be able to support that level of plan time. So that has pretty much been our process for many, many years. And so then during the 18-19 school year, when we started collaborating with the Partnership for Resilience and had the opportunity to attend the By All Means conference that year, that is when we started really investigating and understanding the ISSP process. And it just seemed like the logical next step for us in terms of what could become kind of the umbrella to our existing work that would help us, initiate relationships with parents, especially at the onset of the school year, and then obviously throughout the school year. So during the 18-19 school year, we actually began the ISSP process with our 7th and 8th graders, primarily because we wanted to be able to address their transition year into the high school and involve parents in that direction. So we actually started kind of on the back end, and we're moving kind of downward in terms of our grade levels. So by the 19-20 school year, we had expanded that to 5th and 6th grade. And just as Keri mentioned, with the onset of COVID-19, the silver lining was that it provided us the opportunity to then look at ISSPs for all of our students, beginning with the 2021 school year. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we felt that was extremely important in being able to explain this to our board and obviously our extended community was just to put in perspective for them what all was going to be involved. And again, this was constantly around the language of a whole child experience within our school setting. And so putting the ISSP process at the core of what we were doing in an effort to support the Illinois State Board of Education and their initiatives around whole child, whole school, whole community. And so we spent time looking at our vision and mission statements and our belief statements, all in an effort to make sure that we were looking at, again, a whole child approach that involved the ISSP process, and at the same time really launched the interest and the support for the navigator role that I'll talk about here in just a moment. So then what you see supporting the ISSPs are the components of the ISSP and the information that we are looking for as we move through that discussion with parents and guardians and students. So you'll see the student information, demographics, etc., discussions around their learning modalities, student interests, how they think they learn best, various focus areas, a lot of reflection happening within the ISSP process. Instructional steps that are necessary, so strategies, resources, interventions, etc., and even going a step further in creating transition plans. So still having an opportunity within the ISSP process to go the next step for those students who need full-blown transition plans from one grade level to the next. And then obviously goal setting, strengths, weaknesses, areas that they want to improve upon, personal goals, etc. And then what you see surrounding that are all of the various supports that are absolutely necessary to have within our school district. We are a one building district, so these are the things that we needed to commit to. So making sure that we had things in place for teacher care, teacher wellness, kid care, kid wellness, social emotional supports, community supports, peer-to-peer supports, and administrative supports. So that was just a way for us to kind of consolidate the thought process around everything that we expected to accomplish in a whole child experience at Unity Point. Next slide, Lynn. So in talking a bit more about the advisor role or the navigator role, just as Keri was explaining, within the ISSP process, all of our students are assigned a navigator or an advisor. We are a much smaller district, so we have about 125 employees. Any one of those employees can be assigned as a navigator. Student preference is we try really hard to honor that. So that may sound kind of strange, but for example, our students have interactions with just about everyone in this building. So our bus drivers know all of their kids' names. We don't contract out a bus service. So our custodians are our bus drivers. So they are involved quite a bit. So just as an example, we have bus drivers that are currently teaching in our summer school program. So, kids are well versed with the adults within this building. And so we work really hard to put, individuals in those navigator roles that students feel comfortable with and feel like that they can have those kinds of conversations with. One of the things that happened as a result of COVID was that we were able to begin the school year with what we considered to be a soft start. So we actually took the first 2 weeks of this school year as we were engaging in remote learning and invited all of our parents in with their student to conduct their individual ISSP. At the start of the school year, we had 539 students enrolled. 538 families participated throughout those 2 weeks. So we had their parents and the student in to actually conduct their initial ISSP coming into the 2021 school year. Ultimately, what happens then thereafter that is, as Keri was also mentioning, check-in, check-outs with our students between the navigator and the student, as well as when we came back from Christmas, we took another soft start. We spent time revisiting the ISSPs with our families and with our students. And then what happened here toward the end of the school year, especially in our lower grades, is we conducted grade level transition meetings utilizing the ISSP information with parents and students. At our upper grade levels, we had students then during their last parent-teacher conferences, they held student-led parent-teacher conferences to share their ISSP information as they saw it, and primarily to do so in preparation so that they could advocate for themselves, especially our 8th graders, as they transitioned into meeting and working with their high school teachers. So the student and advisor, although it indicates formally that they meet quarterly, it's almost a daily interaction, just because, again, of the nature of how we are designed. And so, and I'll talk a bit more as we get into the design elements, but similarly, our advisors or navigators, they have a script and they have a set of prompts that they work through with the students in gathering that information. We are a Google school, and we are currently working with a couple of different companies looking at how we can build out a platform to be able to capture all of our data. We have what we need in terms of our the numbers, our academic data, assessment data, etc. What we're trying to do is figure out how to capture all of the really qualitative data that we are gathering with our families and with our students, and be able to create that whole picture portfolio type of approach for all of our students so that it carries from year to year. So that's kind of our next step. The other piece that has been extremely important for the ISSP process, as well as our navigators and our students, we have built-in wellness days for both. And so that we can provide common experiences for our students, common experiences for our staff. So most recently, as part of the training, but at the same time to support wellness efforts, we have partnered with Fuel Ed, and we led our staff through understanding empathy and engaging in empathy circles. And those are things that we now do on a regular basis so that our staff can share in that way and express what their needs may be throughout the school year beyond what we're doing with ISSPs. And then throughout those wellness days, we make sure that we continue to include our mental health consultants so that they can continue to provide individual counseling. And then we conduct mini seminars during those wellness days for our students around executive functioning, trauma, academic prep, things of that nature. And usually for that agenda, our students and the information that's been gathered through the ISSP process sets that agenda. We've also added to include in the ISSP conversation with between navigator and students. We've been doing a bit more around career exploration, and we have extended that to our lower grades. So now it's 3rd through 8th grade, not just our junior high students. And then, of course, in building out the student portfolio, the navigator assists the student in selecting artifacts with a focus on core content. And then finally, just really quickly, as we get into and really fully understand the impact of ISSPs and the work that we are doing around trauma, et cetera, and you can advance the next slide, Lynn, is that we have really found that the use of the ISSP really assists us in developing and providing the varied supports that are needed to provide equal access to the school experience, and not just academically. And so we've really made sure that through the ISSP process, we can look at where our gaps are with regard to equity, and then also really inform our process around what it means to be trauma responsive. So we feel like the ISSP has really assisted us in both of those areas, and understanding that they cannot be separate from the work that we're doing, and that they have to be part of the overall bigger picture as we have conversations around how to continuously improve within our district. And then obviously we utilize the data coming out of the ISSPs and what the navigators share with us on a regular basis to set goals to inform our instruction, and most importantly, to really assist teachers, staff, students, and now parents to really partner in the education of our children. And so again, that is one thing that I think COVID, if there were a positive, what really happened in terms of the level of partnership between our families, our parents, our students, and our teachers through the ISSP process really just went through the roof this past year. And so now our dilemma is how to continue that and how to further train our navigators to really extend that relationship when we're back to quote unquote some level of normalcy. And then finally, I think that the ISSPs have really allowed for students to build confidence in their voice and advocacy efforts for themselves. And, you know, their ability to share with their parents through student-led conferences has been an accomplishment that has come out of the ISSPs. And again, that is all due to the selection of the navigator and how that navigator or advisor supports that student throughout the process. So that's kind of where we're at this point.
Thank you so much for that. You know, I think one of the really exciting things to see about Unity Point, there are a lot of design elements that are so interesting and worth learning from, but you have the history of having developed this initially several years ago and then refining it and further expanding it during COVID. So that gives a lot of expertise to draw on. And now, before we start to talk about some specific design choices and elements, since we've had the chance to hear from district level administrators, we wanted to make sure that we also shared some perspectives of those who are working more closely with the Navigator system. So we just have a short video that captures the voices of a few of the folks from these districts who have been working with success planning and the Navigators over the past year.
The most meaningful side of the Navigator process that must continue is that just regular pulse check with our students to see how they're doing emotionally, how are they doing academically, what needs do they have, and then helping them kind of develop as young people, finding out what their strengths are, finding out what their weaknesses are, and then connecting them and using that information to establish a plan for our school that will include those needs in there. Really, my vision for our school is that every single student in this school has a village around them. So if a kid is struggling, then part of our role is to connect that student with the members in that village who can intervene in that moment and set things back on the right path.
I got into this profession because I wanted to make a real difference in children's lives. And I've been very proud of my career all the way up through. But this ISSP thing really, to me, has taken it to a different level. It's made me an even more impactful teacher. And I know that I've heard from kids, students, that they say how helpful it's been. And wow, I feel more confident as I'm about to head off to high school. I'm seeing kids growing as learners. It's like they are taking more ownership for themselves.
The navigation program helped me to realize my strengths and my weaknesses. I had such a big support system with the teachers. It allowed us to build a relationship with the teachers. It's good to have somebody you can go to. It's such a big help to know someone is there for you.
Okay, so now we are going to turn to talking about a couple of the design elements for the Navigator role. And we're going to do this a little bit as a lightning round to make sure that we do have time to get to some questions from the audience as well. I know that we have people from across the country and as far away as Lebanon who are all interested in hearing more about this and thinking about how they might design a system like this within their own communities. So design element number one is just who serves as Navigator, and we've heard a fair amount about that already. Number two is what does the Navigator actually do? And number three is what supports does the Navigator need? And for each of these, we have just a little bit more information about some of the kinds of choices that people might make and what some of the pros and cons are for it. So, obviously teachers are prime candidates to serve as navigators, but in both of the districts that we've heard from today, other school personnel and even district level personnel have been involved as navigators. It does not, though, have to be just school-based people who are serving in these roles. And so depending on how you think about capacity and whether you want to build in some new capacity or have opportunities even to create a success planning system outside of the school district primarily. You might have AmeriCorps volunteers or community organization workers. And of course, counselors and social workers are those who are already trained and, sort of prime candidates to serve in this role. The challenge, of course, there is that we don't have enough counselors and social workers in most districts or most communities. And so there are some capacity issues there. So clearly there's some choices to make about working with existing staff, building in new staff. There are cost implications of that and training implications. And so what I'd like to ask each of you, and starting with Keri, we heard how you decided to build a system that would include a much broader set of school personnel than just teachers. What did you see as the pros and cons to making that decision?
Yes, I mean, we were really focused on relationship building. And one of the assumptions we made is that we needed to keep the number of students a navigator was serving low in order to build those strong relationships. So we provided in the handbook, and I, how shall I say, coached a lot of principals in thinking about who in their building could serve in that role effectively. I will add that we actually excluded some folks, or we made the suggestion that they exclude counselors, social workers, and behavioral support specialists at the school from the pool of navigators, because we were really encouraging them to deploy those people in support of what was discovered, right, in these check-ins. And so we actually didn't have many counselors or social workers, for example, serving in the role. They were really on that leadership team I mentioned at the school level. But really, I think I mentioned this before, but I'll just emphasize it again. When I would have conversations with principals and supporting them, we would talk a lot about, look, who in your building can build strong relationships with kids? And I will tell you that almost every time we had that conversation, certainly teachers were in that bucket, but the front office staff was almost always brought up. And we have some really great stories on both sides, because one of the things I didn't stress is that we didn't pay people extra for this role. This was part of their duties. And we talked about that this is actually a really important role that all educators and those of us who work with kids in a school play every day. We're now doing this with intention. So I will bring that up to you. But I can't stress enough that some of these front office staff have been amazing navigators over the last year, to be honest. So
really interesting to hear that. Lori?
So in our situation, again, we have 125 employees. We have 2 social workers, and 1 mental health consultant. And so, similar to what Keri was explaining, we felt like that population really needed to kind of be on the outskirts of the ISSP process. With that said, though, we do have some students who felt very strongly about having one of those individuals as their navigator. And so, we would take that into consideration. And so we do have some situations where a social worker or the behavior consultant or interventionist is working as a navigator, but very limited capacity. We also utilize our AmeriCorps workers. Any student that comes to us, or student teacher that comes to us from Southern Illinois University, they are also part of the process, so that we can, it's a training, educational experience for them as well. So they are part of that process. And as Keri indicated, our front office staff, our bus drivers, our cooks, they're all a part of the navigator, or could be a part of the navigator selection. So when we went through the empathy training with Fuel Ed, we made sure that every single employee in the district participated in that training, so that was kind of a baseline understanding. One of the things that we found with any of our navigators is getting to the use of a common language around how to conduct an ISSP, especially as a non-certified staff that maybe aren't as comfortable in that role as a teacher, and really having to coach those individuals. But at the same time, when the relationship is there, that ISSP process really happens a bit more naturally than what we really anticipate. And I think once they got into that mode and those individuals understood what was expected of them as a navigator, it came much more organic in terms of the process itself. We are located really in the middle of nowhere. And so we don't have a community per se around us. Unity Point is the community. We are located, just outside of Carbondale. And so we don't actually have, we're not part of really the Carbondale community itself. And so when we start talking about looking at having individuals coming from outside of the district, it gets a little more difficult just because of the seclusion and where we're located. I think parents would be really concerned about that in terms of how we are utilizing those outside people. So that's something that I think as this builds, we're going to have to look into that and figure out ways to build those partnerships so that we can ease in additional navigators that both parents and students you can feel comfortable with and can feel like that they can have access to like they do on a regular school day with all of our internal advisors and navigators here in the building.
Great, thank you. So for the second design element, it's really a question of what does the navigator actually do? Given that we're starting to run short on time, and I think you've both covered that pretty thoroughly, I'm just putting the slide up there. You'll all have a chance to get these slides later. So these are really the options that a district or community would want to consider in terms of what form, for example, the assessment would take, if it's more formal or less formal, what it includes in terms of content. And I would just highlight in particular the connecting students with supports and services. There's a whole range of ways that a district or community could think about that set of supports. Obviously, the broader, the better for kids, but you have to start with what you can. You could imagine, starting with a more narrow set and then building to a broader one. And then to this question of what supports do navigators need? And you've both already spoken to some of the training and materials and supports that you've created, because even teachers don't necessarily, we've heard increasingly, feel comfortable jumping into this role. They don't feel that their role as a teacher transfers completely to having one-on-one conversations where they hear much more intensive and often personal needs. So we've heard some of that. And, we've heard from you, Lori, about the secondary trauma issue, that the teachers and other navigators, whoever serves in that role, need support themselves, because this is, a whole new level of involvement and one for which they're not inherently prepared. And so, I just wanted to specifically ask the question of, for you, Lori, in particular, what was it you were hearing from those who are serving as navigators that made you reach out to Fuel Ed and feel that you needed to, take on that additional support role?
Well, a couple of things. I think most importantly, again, common language, common understanding of kind of whole child philosophy. But most importantly, we really had to wrap our heads around the empathy piece, being empathic in that moment when you're having these conversations, because as you're talking with students, as a person who spent some time observing how the ISSP process plays out, you could see when, a student would go a direction and all of a sudden that kind of deer in a headlight look from the teacher, like, what do I do with this? Because it was uncomfortable, or, it was intense or whatever. And so we really felt like it was important for the training around, how to manage those kinds of conversations, but even going a step further and talking about the difference between empathy and compassion, and making sure that our navigators understand the difference, because sometimes when you get really involved in empathy and being, empathetic, it can get very exhausting. It can get debilitating in some cases, because you take on that other individual's situation. So we had a lot of crying from navigators early on, just because they were hearing things that they just didn't anticipate engaging with students. So just really giving them an understanding of how to manage it, how to work their way through it, and the kinds of questions that they could turn around and ask of that student to be able to probe and gather more information so that we could get the right types of supports to them.
Thank you. And Keri, I'm wondering if you could just say another word about the handbook and the scripts that you've developed.
Sure. I totally agree with what Lori was saying. I think we can't assume that even though someone's an educator and they have training, that they are prepared for the types of conversations that we are asking navigators to have and the types of situations that we are learning about. One thing I'll say about that as an aside, and then I'll answer that question, is I've heard from teachers and navigators and others that they actually have a much deeper understanding of their school community as a result of these conversations. And the other thing we've heard, and I know someone asked about this earlier, that the assumptions we make about parent engagement in this school, it's broken down some of the barriers there, that the parent engagement and family engagement we saw through the Navigator system has been transformative for some schools and actually challenged some of the assumptions that some of the educators had in that school community. So I'll say that. We really were pretty scripted in the beginning. And what we tried to do, though, is make it really transparent about the way those scripts worked. So there was, I'll call it an SEL check-in at the beginning, a relationship building piece. We provided prompts around, which Lori mentioned. Then we were checking in on a specific area that we thought might be a need. And we were giving very explicit language around how to do that. One area that we saw navigators were a little hesitant around was housing insecurity. So our team pushed in there and providing a short video of training where they modeled a conversation, for example. We found those really short videos were helpful and people utilized those. So we also made that handbook a living document. So we were able to respond to feedback from the field and shifting situations that were happening during the school year to update it. It also became a really important communication tool with families. So we were providing even, I would call them critical announcement type pieces that was coming to the family in multiple ways, but through the Navigator as well. So that handbook really was, in the beginning, very important. Now it's more of a resource guide. What we found is once that relationship was built, people kind of understood the way these conversations go. They've built a relationship with that student and family. They've taken it from there. They're still collecting that data that we talked about, but we really saw that they were doing that on their own. And so we only scripted through 12 weeks, if that's helpful.
Thank you. And I'll point out that this incredible resource is actually publicly available, and I believe that we have linked to it in the chat. So for those of you who are interested in seeing what this actually looks like, feel free to take a look at that. I see too that we have some questions about some of the more specific details that I know Keri already has in a more complete slide deck that she had put together for a different presentation. So we can actually share that as part of the material that we give everybody after this session. And to make sure that we do get to some of the specific questions, I'm just going to jump forward. You will have these slides after, and so I hope you do take a look at both that cautionary slide and some of the key equity considerations for building in the Navigator role. But I just want to make sure that we have a chance to talk about some of these questions from the audience, specifically to start with what have been, and there's a long question, so I'm going to ask you each to just identify one quick one. What have been the most challenging aspects of operationalizing success planning in your community? And so just think of this as a lightning round, like a 30-second version. Lori, let's start with you.
I think just initially the organization of it, just kind of shifting to how to build out the ISSPs and to schedule the time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think for us, it was this, we have 134 schools. So it was the assumption at some schools that this wasn't needed. Wrong. And we had to establish that up front. This might be a helpful statistic. Only 3% of families opted out of the Navigator system across the whole district. So.
Wow, that's amazing. And there's a question also about how those who were asked to become navigators felt about taking on that role. So again, let's start with Lori and then go to Keri.
So for us, it really wasn't an option. Again, just because of the number of employees that we have, what we try really hard to do is to make sure that we are pairing students and navigators so that both can be successful. Because it's an all hands on deck kind of situation here. That's the only way for us to be able to work with every single student within the district. So we work really hard at making sure that success is there for both the navigator and the student.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think we really tried to push in where we could with the scripts and things like that to lower what felt like the workload and preparation. We also monitored the data, and schools where we didn't see check-ins happening, we pushed in to provide help at the school level. We pushed in with district office personnel to help, just tried to help that school identify the hesitancy that was there and how we could get over it. It was a lot of one-on-one conversations with schools, but we eventually got there for the most part, to be honest. Oh, I also mentioned one thing here. So I often talked about this with navigators specifically, like, look, these are really the conversations that you would normally have in the hallway, in the cafeteria, between classes. But because we were virtual in the beginning, I said, look, we can't have those right now. So how are we creating a system of support for them? And then we also linked to something that you all may have done before, where you take the name of every student in a school and you put it on a sticky note, and everybody marks the student that they know well. Like we linked to that kind of that felt need that all of us have that work with kids, that every student be known and have the supports they need. So we pulled on those, that kind of the why of people. We tried to pull on their why to help them understand, like, look, this might be uncomfortable, but it's just so important. Let us help you get over that discomfort.
And Keri, we went through the exact same activity.
Well, thank you both so much. I think that's all the time we have for questions, but you've really, shown how powerful this can be and how to make it work. One of the challenges for this kind of bold new undertaking is that it just seems so daunting. But Nashville has managed to put this in place in less than a year. And Unity Point went from a much, much smaller program to one that serves all the kids, again, in just a very short period of time. So, with enough initiative and energy and creative thinking, a lot of things are really possible. So thank you for sharing that. And just as we wrap up here, and apologies to those of you whose questions we didn't get to, but we will be sharing all the slides with you, and we'll also make sure that you have a link to the resource from Nashville so that you have that training manual. And we are planning a series of future webinars on specific topics. So we'll be covering how to connect the children with support. So that whole piece at the other end of it, once you've found out what kids need, how do you make sure that they actually get those supports and resources? Thinking about how you identify goals and metrics for this work. I know that there were some questions about evaluation and data, thinking about the data platform itself, and then more. We're intending to continue this over the next year. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us, and especially thank you to Keri and to Lori for sharing your expertise with us today. Goodbye.